welcome to episode 17 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. I know it hasn't been very long since my last podcast episode, but I had a new finished object that I just couldn't wait to talk to you about, so here I am again. And just to let you know, there might be some background noise in this episode because Doyle is currently making us dinner, but I really wanted to podcast right now, so hence there might be some background noise. But I do have my microphone, so hopefully that kind of filters out some of the background noise. And, you know, Rue sometimes walks all around with his clicky claws. Anyway, I am here again with a new podcast episode. Now, I don't have a mug of the episode today. I am just drinking some water out of my tumbler because it is in the evening and I didn't feel like having a tea right now. So, water time. Cheers. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I have been cheating on my whips lately. I have been doing more than one whip at a time, which is not like me. I am usually a monogamous knitter, but I was working on my eclair raglan for 3 months, and getting to the end of the eclair raglan, it was getting too big to take back and forth to work, so I wanted a small project to work on during meetings and on my lunch hours, so I casted on a very fun sweater. I joined the Let's Lento Cal that was hosted by Rebecca of the Crayabea and Amy Palco, and that ran from January 5th to it ran from January 5th until March 5th, and I joined probably around like the 10th of February or something like that. I wasn't in on it for the first little bit, and I actually did not finish my Lento in time for the end of the Cal, but I got very close, and it only took me another week to finish my Lento after the end of the deadline. But I was still entered to win because they were accepting whip pictures as well as finished object pictures. I didn't win any prizes, but that's okay. I didn't need to win any prizes, and I really just enjoy the camaraderie of being in a knit along. It really spurred me on to try out this pattern, and I am very excited because I think it might be one of my favorite sweater patterns. It does might be. Before I get too caught up in everything, let me tell you what the pattern is. I have knit myself the Lento sweater, which is by Jona Hayatala or Hona Hayatala. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce her name, so I do apologize if I get it wrong. It was published in what to me looks like Lane magazine, but apparently it's pronounced Lina magazine. So again, I apologize if I pronounce anything incorrectly. I always thought it was Lane magazine because lin is the French word for wool, and I thought that it was a French magazine, but I think it's actually a Danish magazine, and they pronounce things differently over in Denmark. So I am not familiar with Danish, and I do apologize if I pronounce anything incorrectly. But this is a wonderful, wonderful pattern. I really, really love it. It comes in 9 sizes, ranging from a 38.5 inch bust to a 67.25 inch bust, which is a really nice array of sizes, especially for a knitting magazine. I know when I was first getting into knitting, this was in 2015, I steered clear of a lot of magazine patterns because often they stuck with extra small to extra large or even just small to large for their pattern sizes. So most of the time they didn't come in my size and I couldn't make them for myself. But there is a shift happening now where knitting magazines such as Lina Magazine, Pom Pom Quarterly, they are being more stringent about the need to have size-inclusive patterns. So they offer a wide variety of sizes. So I absolutely love that change that's happening, and it means that I can now start paying attention to magazine patterns as well as independently published patterns. So I am very excited about that. I actually recently bought myself the Dreamscapes issue of Pom Pom Quarterly because there's quite a few patterns in that I would really love to make. And I can feel confident that all of those patterns are available in my size because it is a size-inclusive knitting magazine. So, Let's talk all about my Lento because I am just gushing about this pattern. I think this is one of my favorite sweaters that I've ever made. It's just under my Into the Woods sweater, which will always be my absolute favorite, I think. And that's because I enjoyed every single second of the process of making that sweater, almost to the point that I didn't really care if I got a product at the end of it because I was enjoying the process so much. And I was teaching myself how to do colorwork knitting for the first time, and being successful at it made me feel really, really confident and really proud of myself. And those colors are just like my favorite fall colors, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. But this one is a very, very close second because it has the most fun color scheme I've ever used for a pattern. I did a fade, and it is just absolutely heavenly. It is super, super soft. It was a really easy pattern. It was very simple to follow. The fit is phenomenal. I'm super impressed with the fit. And I only made a few tweaks to the pattern, and I am super excited to share all of this with you. So let's start with the most obvious, which is the yarn. Let's talk about the yarn first. I received for Christmas this year from Doyle 2 skeins of Hedgehog Fibers Kid Silk Lace in the color Hush. Now, I had asked for this yarn. He didn't go out and get it on his own. But to me, Hush is the most beautiful Hedgehog Fibers colorway out there. And there are a lot of Hedgehog Fibers colors. And I have been eyeing this color for a couple years, and I put it on my Christmas wish list this year, and Doyle got me some, and I was in love with it from the minute I opened the package, and I wanted to use it in a sweater, and I knew 2 skeins would be enough to do a few different patterns, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So when I got it, I then posted in my story asking other knitters, what are your favorite patterns that are size inclusive that can be made with just 2 skeins of this mohair lace? And I had quite a few really good suggestions, and then I found some on my own as well. If you're interested in any of these, I have a highlight in my Instagram bio that tells you everything about the patterns that I was suggested. Like I list all the patterns that I was suggested with links to them, and I also did polls about whether I should use just the mohair on its own or if I should use it with another yarn, and most people said I should use the mohair by itself, and I was very tempted to do that. I know Park Knits has the Phantom Fuzz and the Ghost Whisperer tops, both of which I was really interested in. And of course, in the Pom Pom Quarterly Dreamscapes issue, there was the Plumatis sweater, which I was very interested in. But when I also asked people their pattern suggestions of patterns that use mohair with another yarn, I was recommended the Lento by Rebecca of the Crayabea, and she had recently made one. So I was asking for suggestions in January, and I think in the fall she had made one herself, and she had been able to use 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn. Now, Rebecca is a bit smaller than me, and I knew that I probably wouldn't be making the same size as her. So I was a little skeptical going into this pattern, and I fully expected to be playing Yarn Chicken the whole time, and I had some contingency plans. So my hope was to get a cropped length sweater with full length sleeves, which I got. But my contingencies were I would go for a length that I was comfortable with first, and I would start decreasing on the sleeves. So I would aim to get the length that I wanted on the sweater and use whatever yarn I had left to get whatever length sleeve I was able to get. So I was thinking maybe I can get 3/4 length sleeves. And if I wasn't able to get 3/4 length sleeves, well, I'll do short sleeves. So I had all of these plans in place. And of course, you know, if it didn't work at all, I would have chucked it in the freezer for a little while and then carefully leapfrogged it and used the yarn in a different way, which that was like absolutely last possible option. Really didn't want to do that if I didn't have to. And I didn't have to because I was able to get my plan A, which was a crop sweater with full-length sleeves. And it's not like a micro crop sweater. It's like the same length as my souffle tee crop sweater, which is super, super versatile. I'm able to wear it with a lot of different things. In fact, I took my finished object photos wearing a pair of my high-waisted jeans. But when I wore it to work earlier this week, I wore a longer tank top underneath it just to make sure that I was feeling very comfortable for my whole day at work. Because if I'm just putting this on to take a few pictures and then come back home, I really don't mind if, my sweater is like rolling up and my belly is kind of hanging out because I'm at home. But if I'm at work, I want to have that extra layer of garment security, as you will. So I decided that I wanted to do the Lento sweater using the Hedgehog Fibers Hush held with another yarn. And I thought I would probably have to buy something to go with it at first. But then I happened upon what I thought was my brilliant beyond brilliant idea, which is, I always say that I come up with a brilliant beyond brilliant idea anytime I have a really good idea, because that's a scene from The Parent Trap, which is a movie that I grew up with. And yeah, it's almost like the sit straight up, I have a brilliant beyond brilliant idea. So I had one of those when I was planning on making the Lento sweater. I remembered I have Advent yarns. And a lot of these Advent yarns are purple, or like a pinky purple. And sure enough, when I started going through my Advent yarns, I'm pulling out like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm finding tons of purples. And they look like they'll go in a really nice fade. All of a sudden, even bigger light bulb moment. Like, it's just, everything is working out how I'm planning. It just seems like it's going to be the perfect pattern, the perfect yarn choice. It's going to be fabulous. And I ended up choosing 9 mini skeins off the bat. And most of those mini skeins were from my Woolshed Advent Calendar, which was Enchanted Forest for 2022. And I did use a couple mini skeins from another Advent calendar that I got, but I choose not to support that dyer anymore because they were very unprofessional. It was a nightmare trying to get the Advent calendars, and then the dyer was very unresponsive, it was just a mess. So I don't want to support that person by naming them. So most of my minis are from the Woolshed, who is Liv. Absolutely love her yarn. Very excited to get some of it in the mail shortly. She's currently dyeing up her Flower Fairies collection, and I purchased some, so I'm excited to have that arrive soon. But yeah, so I had a lot of purples and pinks to choose from for this pattern, and I decided to put them in a fade order from darkest to lightest. And that's because out of all of the mini skeins, my favorite 3 were the darkest ones. And I wanted to start with my favorites and then go down to my still very, very beautiful yarns, but I wanted to have the focal point of the sweater, which is the yoke, be my favorite colors. The second color that I use is my absolute favorite of the whole fade, but the first color is my very, very close second. So I ended up picking 9 colors to begin with. As I got further into the sweater, I realized I needed a couple more, so I used 11 mini skeins total. But the 11th mini skein is only on the cuffs of the sleeves and the ribbed hem of the sweater. Otherwise, the minis were used in big chunks. So let's see if I can show you where all 11 of the colors are. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I didn't use all 11 on the body. All 11 go from the collar down to the sleeves. And that's because I finished the length of the body that I was really happy with when I finished this color here. So I only needed to use an extra color on the sleeves, and then I chose to use an extra one on the ribbing just to make sure I wasn't going to run out of a color halfway through the ribbing, because I really don't like joining a yarn in ribbing. I prefer to have it like higher up so that it's easier to hide the ends. Speaking of joining ends, I used magic knot to join all of my yarns, and let's see if I can show you one. Here's one right here. So this is what the magic knot looks like. It's just a little knot of yarn. And I used that technique just so I wouldn't have to worry about making sure I had enough of each little mini ball once I divided them between the body and the sleeves. I wanted to be sure that I could get as even a stripe across the whole thing as possible. So I didn't want to worry about doing stripes for fading or anything like that. And I didn't do marling because that would have changed the gauge of the sweater. And the sweater uses one strand of fingering and one strand of mohair. So I didn't want to use 2 strands of fingering and 1 strand of mohair because that would have changed the look of the sweater and it would have used up the yarn a lot faster. But for the most part, I was able to get my stripes as even as possible across the body and the sleeves. And where I finished my body before the sleeves were done, and I just split that ball in half, and I didn't mind that this section was going to be wider than the other sleeves because it's only on the sleeves, it's closer to the end, and because I'm using this beautiful mohair throughout the whole project, it's really making the changes in the fingering weight yarns very seamless. They blend really nicely with each other. I'm really happy with how I chose to fade them. There's only like 1 or 2 that I think I probably could have swapped. For example, I found this one after I'd already done my original fade, but I think this color probably would have fit much nicer here. It's okay though, I don't really mind. I adore this sweater so much, and I really, really adore the yarn. I just think it's so fun, it's so colorful, it's very bright and cheerful, it's very me. So I really love it, the yarn choice. I love the colors and everything, and it is just super, super soft. Like, I wore this to work on Wednesday, I'm recording on Sunday, and I had all of my coworkers feel it to feel how soft it was. Now, because we have a carpeted office, unfortunately a few of them got shocked as well, but they would touch it, and my coworker that I work with the most, she was the first one to touch it, and as soon as she touched it with her hand, she said, "Oh," and just brought it to her face and rubbed it on her face because it was so soft. So it is absolutely softer than anything else that I have hand knitted. And it's so soft and cozy that I find myself putting it on at night when I'm also wearing my sweatpants. It's really that cozy, comfy of a sweater that I want to lounge in it all the time. And it has sort of like stretched out a bit since I blocked it, mostly on the sleeves. I noticed it on the sleeves. They're kind of gaping now, whereas before they were more fitted to my arm, but it's okay. I don't mind. They hit at exactly the right spot that I want them to hit. They are long enough that I could bring them over my hands, but they're also short enough that they don't get in my way when I'm trying to do anything with my hands. And I absolutely love everything about this sweater fit-wise. So let's segue into talking about the fit of the sweater. I feel like I'm talking really fast. I should probably slow down. I chose to make size 5, which is 50.75 inches, which is perfectly neutral ease for myself because I kind of range between I'm between 50 and a 51 inch bust right now. And I wanted to pick the smallest size that I could possibly go with to make sure I could maximize on the length of the sweater to use up the yarn that I had, because I knew I was very limited with the amount of yarn that I could use. I actually used every single scrap of my Hedgehog Fibers Kid Silk. I put it in my Instagram story asking people how much I had left when I finished it, and I only had 8.5 inches of that left at the end. And that was from weaving in the tail of my long tail cast on from doing the collar of this sweater. I literally used every scrap of that yarn. But I have a perfectly fitting sweater, both widthwise and lengthwise. The sweater wants you to do a folded collar. So that's actually a change that I made. I knew I wanted to use as much of my yarn as possible and make sure I wasn't going to run out. So I thought that was an easy way to not have to use as much yarn. I just did, well, when I knitted it, it was 1 inch, but it has since shrunk to about 1 centimeter of a ribbed collar, which is fine. I'm okay with that. You only really need a few, I did 1 inch on all of my edges just to make them nice and clean. But I was very, very happy that I was able to block the neck a little bit wider. I've talked in my podcasts a bit about how I like to have more of a lower collar so that I'm not choking. And I find the Lento, when I was trying it on before it was blocked, it was more up to the neck. And I wanted it down a bit more, so I just kind of blocked it a bit bigger. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. But yeah, I went down to the yoke, and when I finished the yoke before blocking it, it did look like it might be a little too shallow for me, but I didn't want to lengthen the yoke because I wanted to have as much of the yarn as possible for the body of the sweater. And I have to say, I'm so glad I did not lengthen the yoke, because this has got to be one of the best fitting yokes that I have ever knit for myself. I often have sweaters that the yoke is just too baggy because I need the width to fit my bust. And typically that means more length. So I typically have a deeper yoke than I would really need. But because it's top-down raglan, it's kind of easy to stop where you are. To stop wherever you need to for the fit. I did not make any modifications to the yoke in any way. However, I did run into an issue with the amount of repeats that it wanted you to do in the pattern. I don't remember how many yoke repeats it told me to do, but it told you to do X number of repeats, and at the end you should have X number of stitches. Well, I counted my stitches on the second last yoke repeat, and I had the correct number of stitches, so I didn't need to do that last increase row that the pattern told me to do. So that was a little issue with the pattern for myself, knitting size 5. And then I also had another problem with the pattern where the sleeve count, I reached the correct sleeve count after 1 less decrease than the pattern said to do. So I think a problem with the pattern is the way that it says to do the repeats. It says to do, it gives you the instructions for the repeat, and then it says to do X number more repeats. I think what it should say is that you need to do a total of X number of repeats, because I had 1 extra repeat for both the sleeve decreases and the yoke increases. So I think that's just a little mistake in the pattern. But if you're counting your stitches after so many of these repeats, you're aware of what you have on your needle, and it's very simple to just leave off that extra increase or decrease in this case. And it's not the end of the world if you do that extra decrease or increase and have a different stitch count, because it's a pretty standard sweater. You would only have changed your numbers by very, very few numbers of stitches, so it's not the end of the world. Actually, I was talking to Rebecca about this, and she said that she never even knew that there was an issue with the number of repeats in the pattern, because during the Let's Lento Cal, a lot of people were talking to her about how they did the sweater and they had all of these missing stitch counts, or they had a different number of repeats. They needed to do a different number of repeats than the pattern specified. And Rebecca said that she never encountered that because she has knit herself so many top-down raglan sweaters and feels very confident with that style that she never pays attention to her repeats or her stitch counts, because she just knits it until it's going to fit properly and then she just carries on. So she feels confident doing that, and I feel more confident just counting my stitches and finishing up my increases and decreases when I match the stitch count of the pattern, but everybody knits differently, and that's totally okay. So I did a different length sleeve than the pattern specified, because the pattern actually does what I think is like between a 3/4 length sleeve and a bracelet length sleeve. The pattern picture kind of ends about here on the arm, and I wanted longer sleeves. And I also changed up how I did the ribbing, because they have a 2.5 inch section of ribbing, but I wanted to keep with the stockinette simply because I knew that I would use up less yarn if I continued in stockinette versus doing ribbing where you're switching from knits to purls. It does use a fraction of a bit more yarn, so I thought to myself, well, let's just keep things simple. I'll do a stockinette cuff until I'm ready. I'll do a stockinette sleeve until I'm ready to do the cuff. And I ended up just doing 1 inch cuffs, and I did a 1 inch ribbed hem. Now my body is also a little bit longer than the pattern specifies, and that's just because I found that I needed a bit more length. Because I was doing a size that was pretty much neutral, maybe even veering a little bit into negative ease, it needed a little more stretch width-wise to accommodate for certain things. So that kind of like pulls up the length of the sweater. When I measured it when it was laying flat, it reached the measurement that the pattern said it should be, but when I tried it on, comfort-wise, it wasn't as long as I wanted it to be. So I just kept going until I was comfortable with the length. Now, when it came to using up my minis, here's how I got it to work for me. I used my first 3 colors on the yoke, and then I had maybe like 1 round that I could do on the body with the last bit of that 3rd color on the yoke. And then after that, I took my next 3 colors and I divided the balls into 3. I did a 50% ball that I would use for the body, and then I had 2 25% balls that I was going to use for the sleeves. That calculation worked perfectly for the 4th color that I used, which was the first one that I used on both the sleeves and the body. But after that, it didn't quite work because I was doing decreases and I didn't need the same amount of yarn for those stripe sections on the sleeves. I needed a little less. What I found worked for me was after doing that first section on the body and sleeves where 25%, 50%, 25% worked out perfectly to get the same length stripe across all 3 pieces, I then followed that pattern on the sleeve where I matched up the same size of a stripe with the next color. So my stripes ended up being 4.5 centimeters long, and I then would knit 4.5 centimeters with one of my balls on the first sleeve, then do it on the second sleeve, and then whatever yarn I had left over I would use on the body. So my body actually has a few yarn joins that are on the front of the sweater, but I tried to keep them on the back as much as possible, just because I didn't want to have a lot of little knots or gapes or anything on the front. If they're going to be on the sweater, I want them on the side or on the back. And with the way that I did the magic knot, in order to keep it from being on the front of the work, sometimes I have a bit of a gap in the stitches. I really don't mind. They're all on the back of the sweater. It's not that big of a deal. And it meant that I was able to get the maximum amount of yardage out of these little mini skeins. And it wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. I think I mentioned this in my mini skein pattern roundup videos, where I was always nervous to do a sweater using mini skeins simply because I thought there would be so much math involved. And there's a little bit of math, but I feel like this pattern has kind of given me more confidence to do mini skein patterns, especially fade ones, and especially where I'm holding a strand of mohair that really makes the changes in color feel very seamless. And that's because as long as you have a kitchen scale, it's relatively easy to divide your mini skeins amongst the body and the sleeves. And if it's not perfect, it's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. And especially if you have a coordinating mohair, you're going to hide those imperfections. So it was not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. And in fact, it kind of made the project go really quickly because I had this very clear identifier showing me how far into my project I was and how little I had left to go. So it's kind of like watching this progress marker go as I'm going through the project. And it just made it feel really satisfying to see those color changes and to see, oh, look, I only have X number of mini skeins left to do. I must be getting close to the end of the pattern. And it just felt really, really good and made me feel really accomplished. So I loved that aspect of it. So just before I move on, I do want to mention one not so great part about using this yarn. And if you've ever used mohair before, you know exactly what this problem is. It pills extremely quickly. I expected that. I'm not offended by that. I'm not upset about that. All I do is I just pick them off anytime I'm seeing it and I just move on with my day. So now that I've gushed about this pattern incessantly, let me ask myself the question I always ask in my podcast. Will I make this pattern again? I can honestly confirm I will knit this pattern again many times. And I'm saying it here. I'm going to make this pattern multiple more times because it is such a wonderful, wonderful, very classic pattern that is literally the jumping off point for so many ways of doing this pattern. So this first one that I did, I was limited in my yarn, which made me choose a certain size, and I had to stop at a certain length because of my yarn amount. But I know in the future, I would like to do one that is at least one, possibly two sizes bigger so that I can have a really, really cozy version. And for an oversized one, I probably would do either the folded neckband or I might do a turtleneck instead. So with this pattern, you start with the neckline. I would either start with a professional cast on or I would just start the ribbing, but just like do a lot of ribbing and then start doing the short rows and the raglan and all that stuff. So that's an idea playing around in my head. I'm definitely going to keep this pattern in mind whenever I see some specialty yarn anywhere, because I know from experience I can get away with 900 yards of mohair to make this sweater. It'd be nice if there was a little bit extra so I wasn't like quite on the line, but I know it can be done because I put myself in that situation where I had to try and make it work, and it totally worked. I'm also very interested in doing another faded mini skein version of this sweater. I have trouble using up my mini skeins, and I think I kind of put myself into a corner sometimes by believing that I have to use the whole advent calendar of yarns together simply because they came together. But really I don't have to. And I have a mini skein calendar, advent calendar that I got back in I think 2018 that it very much, the yarns can fall into two separate categories, all blues and all warm tones. And I really feel like both of those would make beautiful fades. I just have never used them together, and I feel like I could very easily do this pattern again using that mini skein advent calendar in two chunks. So I could actually get two more lentos that look just like this, only with different colors, by using that advent calendar. And that advent calendar has been stagnating in my stash for so many years because I never knew what to do with it. And this has given me the best option for something to make using those mini skeins because, first of all, quick and easy, great to follow. I absolutely love the finished product. It's very, very comfy and cozy, and it doesn't take that long. So it's a great way to use up those mini skeins in a way that I had never even thought of before. And I'm super excited to have this pattern in my back pocket now and to do it all over again, but with different colors. Whew. Okay, that was a bit of a whirlwind talking about all the things about the Lento sweater. Let's now talk about something else that I finished very recently, and that is my book review of the episode. I recently finished A Carne by Lynette Noni, or Noni. I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. She's an Australian author. This was another one of the year of books that Doyle and I gave each other. This was one of the ones that he gave me. And it's very much a Harry Potter kind of style book. I think I described it in my review in Goodreads as the chosen one leaves their mundane world and attends a magical boarding school. So it very much is that kind of a story. And it is the first of a set of 5 books. And I really love the characters. I adore the characters in this book. I think they're fabulous and they're very well rounded. They're very nicely fleshed out. They have great personalities. And I really like the idea of this story. Obviously, I am a Harry Potter fan. I like Harry Potter. Not so much anymore because of J.K. Rowling, but I do love fantasy stories, and I love, stories of characters who find themselves, even if they have to go to another world to do that. So this was a book that really hit on a lot of bases that I like. Also, strong female protagonist. Gotta love that. So the story is about Alexandra Jennings, or Alex as she's known in the book, who opens a portal from her world, which is our regular world around us, into another parallel world called Medora. And when she gets there, she enrolls in an academy called Akarne, which is a boarding school for magically gifted children. But she has no idea why she has a lot of potential at this school and why she seems to be pretty good at certain things. And it turns out that she is a very important person. If you choose to read this book, I don't want to give anything away. But she is not what she seems at first. So at first you think that she's kind of like bumbling and she's kind of klutzy and that she's not very apt at her different skill classes and everything. But she ends up becoming very, very good at those different skills. And as much as I enjoyed the world of the boarding school Akarne and the relationship she has with her friends, it's a boring book because nothing really happens until like 350 pages in, and it's a 400 and something page book. So you get like 85% of the way through and then something happens. So the way I describe it is, if it's kind of like Harry Potter, it's like if Harry Potter didn't have all those little events happening throughout the school year. It just goes through the school year as if nothing happens, and then suddenly, boom, you've got the meet up with the big baddie at the end of the school term. And that, I just didn't enjoy that reading experience because I'm constantly waiting for something to happen and nothing is happening. So it's kind of a dull read in that sense because you're constantly waiting for there to be a reason why she's good at everything, and you're waiting to see the reason why such a thing happened, or that this relationship with this person is this way because this. Like, there's too many like crumbs being dropped, but you never get to the end of the trail until you're at the very end. So that's kind of something I didn't love about this book. The other thing I really didn't like about this book is that the author does a lot of telling, not showing. So I think if any of you were in the same types of English classes that I was in when I was growing up, you were always told, show, don't tell. I think this author was given the opposite instructions, tell, don't show. Because there's a lot of sections in the book where things are listed. It'll say, Alex did such and such a thing, and then such and such a thing, and then she did this, and then she went and did this with her friends. And that's no fun to read because it feels like you're being left out of the fun. It feels like the author doesn't want you to come along with everything because they're not showing it to you. And again, that just made for kind of a boring reading experience. So kind of a middle of the road book for me. If you've read it and you have a different opinion, or if you've read the follow-up books, by all means, share with me what you like about it. I'd love to hear. I did read the plot synopses for the books that came after, and It didn't really make me want to continue with the series, so I'm not going to continue with it. But again, if you've read them and you think I should read them, let me know in the comments. That wraps up this quick and dirty podcast episode. It feels quick and dirty because I just decided last minute that I wanted to record right now, and I just started blurting out everything I wanted to say about the Lento sweater, and I really hope that you took away some important information about this pattern, and if you like it, I really hope you try it out for yourself. I know I was so pleasantly surprised by this pattern. I really, really love it. It's definitely something I want to make again, and you know, it's a really great way to use up not very much yarn, even if you're a plus size person. So that is a really great option to have in my back pocket, and I definitely will do it again. If you're a new viewer, thank you so much for joining me. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. While you're here, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel and check out some of my other content. I usually do podcast episodes and pattern roundup videos, but then I also do some other special videos. So take a look at my content and see if there's something you might like to watch. Everybody, take care. Happy knitting.